Hello and welcome to a special edition of Spectator TV. I'm Fraser Nelson. I'm joined by my colleague Svitlana Morenets for a discussion on what's just happened in Ukraine. It's been quite a week. On Monday, Vladimir Putin said he was pulling out of a deal whereby he had guaranteed safety for Ukraine to export grain out of Odessa. He said, guarantees from Ukraine. Those guarantees were not forthcoming, and yet Putin crawled back anyway. So what was behind it? Svitlana, what happened?
Yes, the main trigger for Putin to leave the grain deal was the drone attack on his Black Sea fleet in Sevastopol.
So tell us more about that. So the trigger was an attack on Saturday, and he's got these ships outside Sevastopol, which I imagine the Russian Navy has been there for years because it invaded in 2014. So they'll think those ships were pretty safe back then.
It was the safest base in Crimea for Russian ships. They thought that, but not anymore, because it seemed that Ukraine got new weapons, the Navy drones that they used. Zelensky officially didn't claim responsibility for this, but Ukrainian journalists say that the attack was made by Ukrainian Secret Service.
Right, so until then, Russia didn't realize then that Ukraine had the technology to attack these ships. But all of a sudden, it's not quite a Pearl Harbor attack, but to actually get them attacked off Sevastopol in Russian safe territory will make Russia feel a lot more vulnerable, will it?
Yes, for sure. And that's why Putin was asking Ukraine to give the guarantees for them that Ukraine won't be shelling Crimea anymore and Sevastopol. He was trying to use in the grain deal for that. But the problem is that the warships and the ships that transport grain are two different things. And Ukraine never shelled the grain corridor.
Okay, because we're talking here about Sevastopol, which is in the east, and then the grain mainly comes via Odessa, doesn't it? That's
yes.
And Ukraine exports something like 10% of the world's grain, or it did so before the war. So they're quite far apart. So it's not as if the passage of the ships from Odessa would have any bearing on whether or not Ukraine would attack Russian Navy moored in Sevastopol.
Yes, Ukraine has every right to shell Russian Navy, and it's not gonna harm the grain corridor. Just Putin tried to use his trick, forcing Ukraine to agree that, okay, we're not gonna shell anymore, just let us export the grain. But Ukrainian officials denied that.
Right. Why did Putin agree to the grain corridor in the first place? Because it seemed to be quite a big leverage here. I mean, it's a major export for Ukraine. So why did Putin allow Ukraine to continue its agricultural export?
First, he doesn't want to look like someone who takes the food from the poor people, because he has not so many allies right now. Mm-hmm. And he needs allies in Africa, because they, for now, stayed neutral. And Putin even offered them to send the grain for free. But the problem is that Russia doesn't have all that grain. That grain would be stolen from Ukrainian territories currently occupied by Russia. And also he needs grain deal to cover his Navy ships. He thought that, but now it doesn't work anymore.
Right. So Putin, he was trying a bit of negotiation then. He wanted Ukraine to agree to it. Presumably, he would have thought that perhaps Turkey and perhaps Western allies might have pressured Ukraine to agree to this. But what happened? After he made his demand, how did the negotiations then work?
Surprisingly for Putin, UN, Turkey and Ukraine decided just to continue with the deal without Russia. And they were successful in doing that for 3 days, for the time that Russia was out of the deal. And he decided to come back thanks to Erdogan, because he called Putin and they had a conversation. And actually it is surprisingly because we know Erdogan as close friend of Putin. But for him, the grain question is a question of prestige and authority in Turkey, because the president's elections will be the next year. So right. He was not going to allow that.
So Erdogan then, he needed the grain deal as well, because he gets prestige in Turkey.
Not only in Turkey, I would say in the whole region.
In the whole region, right. So then basically Erdogan was asked to choose by Putin. Are you going to side with Russia or side with Ukraine here? And Erdogan went with Ukraine and decided to keep exporting the grain anyway, or certainly protecting the passage of ships.
Yes, but I wouldn't say that Erdogan has chosen a side. He's trying to be between Russia and Ukraine. He wants to be a main negotiator, and I think that for now he's the only one person that Putin listens to.
Right. So what brought Putin back to the table? It's pretty embarrassing to walk out on a Monday and to have to admit 2 or 3 days later that this gambit had failed. I mean, Putin is a man who doesn't like to lose face, especially against the critics he's now getting even in Moscow.
It would be more embarrassing if the deal continued without Russia, and also if Russia still stays in the deal.
What would it mean, sorry, for the deal to continue without Russia?
If the grain would be still exported by UN, Turkey and Ukraine, and without Russia, they would just keep doing that. But I think that he came back because he can try to tread one more time later. Because if he's in a deal, he still can influence it. But if he leaves it, he doesn't have any power anymore in that.
All right. So this whole episode then, it's just demonstrated that Putin has got less leverage via the grain deal than he might have expected.
Yes, and also I would say that he saw that his blackmail doesn't work anymore. It is not so easy as before. Like his nuclear threats don't work as before, because I think right now the West reacts much more hard to his threats.
All right. And also, I imagine all of this was based, as you were saying earlier, on this military breakthrough, that the Russian fleet is now vulnerable in a way that Putin didn't think it would be. So can we expect more of these drone attacks on Russian ships?
Yes, I'm sure we will see them in the future.
Okay, Svitlana Morenets, thank you very much for joining me. And you can get Svitlana's weekly email about what's happening in Ukraine by going to spectator.co.uk/Ukraine or by clicking on this link. It's free to sign up, and it's the best account you will read, both English language and Ukrainian language sources, in what's happening in the war.